Hey everyone, I wanted to come back with another video today and talk about a topic that I've wanted to talk about for quite some time on here. In my observations today, with using lots of different software, whether it be in my profession or for, personal slash home use, or just kind of used to get things done, like, checking in at a hotel or going to a professional sports game, having to scan like a QR code on your phone, right? I've seen lots of different types of software just as much as anyone else has in our modern world today if you use like a phone or computer or whatnot, right? And one thing I've kind of noticed is, if I really kind of think back to when I was younger, a lot younger, using my first computer I ever had and the first couple of applications slash programs that I had, one thing that I noticed is that software itself used to be a lot more, in my opinion, clean cut, a lot more fluid and just kind of more snappy and responsive and less glitchy overall. Now I'm not saying that some software nowadays isn't this way. There's some applications and software that I use that's great. It's very responsive, it's fluid, it's well thought out, there's proper error handling, right? I'm not saying there's no good software. It's just the pattern tends to be nowadays that software that is being developed is, in my opinion, it's not as good as it used to be. One example of, one reason why maybe is the way I think of it is back in the day, when they were first, releasing like computers, like for example, when Apple released the Apple II or something like the Commodore 64, mainly like computers that were just, one build fits all, like you wouldn't have customizations like different processors, GPUs, different motherboards, stuff like that. When it was more like centralized, developers sort of had a limit as to how much memory they could allocate and the ways they could use the operating system, right? So essentially, that's one reason that makes me think about that. Sorry about that. I had to cut the video there, but yeah, I guess that was my first reason that makes me think about why modern software might not be as good. The second reason that sort of comes to mind is a lot of companies, and I was actually taught this in school. There's different sort of frameworks as to developing software. The two main ones that I was taught is the Waterfall framework, and then the Agile framework. Essentially, in like modern Silicon Valley type society, where you want to constantly have new releases and have the products, have patches and updates quickly, right? You'll follow an agile model where you'll kind of split up a team, and the team will work on different components at the same time, and then bring it all together to get a working product. Now, that's really nice because essentially everything is concurrently done. It's not just one thing at a time, and then the next team can start building this. That's the more, I guess, agile, work. How do I say it here? Like work style or work frame or frame of work, right? Work frames. That's what I'm trying to say. Can't speak, but essentially, agile is a lot more fast paced. It can be really great. I know it's nice. In my senior capstone in college, we basically did an agile workflow. It was kind of interesting to see how it all worked, and it did bring up the product really fast. But yet again, we were just college students, but there was quite a lot more room for error. I know when I think back to it, right, the waterfall framework, on the other hand, is, things are done in a waterfall fashion, one step at a time. I know a lot of like mission critical systems like airplanes, military, stuff like that. They follow the waterfall framework where one thing has to work for them to get to the next thing and then build out the whole product. It's like, for example, if you had an agile team working on an airplane, right, and they're trying to build an engine but didn't have a wing to put the engine on, it wouldn't really work. Well, the airplane, for example, in the waterfall fashion, things are done in a linear, step-by-step approach, to make it all come together and work in the end. The big thing in here is between the agile and waterfall frameworks is the big thing that changed was they realized the money that could be made with agile. I was told this story in college by one professor that I think an early version of iMovie shipped out, and I think the CEO of, not the CEO of Apple, but a higher up at Apple at the time, they said, all that shipped with 200 or 20,000 errors in the code, still something crazy, but they released it because they said, hey, they know still people will still buy it, and we'll just fix it in the next release. And that's sort of an agile framework. Having that type of grasp on the market just allows a lot more money to come in. But thinking that way, having just more of like more releases happen more often, and the more money that comes in, companies don't care. They don't want to spend the time to build something right when they could do it quick and make more money. So really, honestly, money talks, and that's kind of what makes things not as good anymore. And I guess lastly, for example, right, nowadays too, a lot of the software development, a lot of it is, it's not people developing things for the first time. There's a lot of frameworks which are very good and helpful, but also, there's a lot of, I guess AI stuff and AI driven, development, which is fine. I totally get that because you want to save resources, save time, and get more done. But without someone there being able to cross check and validate things, there is potential room for error. And then if you add in, that not all hardware is the same, and then the Agile versus Waterfall framework, and all that kind of stuff, it kind of adds up. And that's why nowadays today there's some modern software that really sucks, and you can just, it's kind of like a telltale sign. I know there's this one tool that I've used. It was in my later college days, and it was so bad to the point where even the team on the university that supported the tool, they didn't even know how to make it work either. So it was really bad, and we had some calls with like the product team, I guess it was called, and that those didn't go good either. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is, things have changed, and money has become the real object, of why some modern software isn't good. Not saying that all modern software sucks. There's still some good software out there. I know one example that kind of comes to my mind is when I use some of the more free and open source Linux or Unix or whatever programs, right? A lot of them, you can tell that they were built, they're still developed in the agile fashion, which is fine, but you can tell that, it wasn't like a money factor, or it wasn't like a hardware, thing where they had, only they could use however much memory they want. Some of the like Linux development and like the tools used for that are still really nice, and you can tell like the kind of thought and the precision that goes into building them, making them stable. I know I use Debian, and that's one of the most stable operating systems for a GNU slash Linux. So it just goes to show it really depends on I think the ulterior motive of who's developing the software and what they want to get out of it. Someone who's developing it for free and has a passion probably has a lot higher chance to make it better than someone who's just doing it for the money. But yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. It's always been an interesting topic of mine. I've read about it here and there, but kind of wanted to share my thoughts on this. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.